Happy Tuesday, everybody.
What's
Welcome
up?
to another episode of Breakfast with Mark and Jen, where
Yes.
we help your Christian marriage thrive.
Yeah.
So, today we have a hot topic. I feel like every Tuesday we kind of have a hot topic,
Mm-hmm.
but today we have a hot topic and we are discussing the fact that marriage is a covenant, it's not a contract.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think that's going to be a deep one for folks. I think a lot of people have missed the fact that marriage is a covenant. And so, first of all, Mark, let's just break it down for folks
Right.
and even explain to them what that even means. Like, what is a covenant?
All right. So a covenant, it's a Bible word, right?
Yeah.
Um, at least that's what I think about when I hear the word covenant.
Mm-hmm.
I think about the fact that God has made promises to people in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So the covenant is a strong promise.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Bible, a lot of times the covenant was ratified or authenticated by certain things,
Mm-hmm.
either a sacrifice or something tangible, a moment. And so that's how God would actually make promises to his people.
Mm.
So if you take the Abrahamic covenant,
Mm-hmm.
the promise that God made to Abraham, it was this great big promise, and he showed Abraham along the way things that would actually authenticate the covenant.
Mm.
And so when we think about the word covenant, we think about promise. And so if you relate that to marriage, you're like, okay, marriage is a promise.
Mm.
We stand before someone and we promise to do life with this person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we promise to uphold the union
Yeah.
against calamity, against poverty, against sickness,
Mm-hmm.
against all of these things. And some people have like crazy vows
Yeah.
these days, and people can write their own vows.
Mm-hmm.
But you say, hey, I promise to be in covenant. I promise to be bonded to this
Mm-hmm.
person, right? And so we wanted to talk about sometimes, a lot of times in our culture, it seems like marriage is more like a contract. People get married,
Mm-hmm.
right, for all different reasons, not necessarily to be bonded to the person to become one, but
Yeah.
they get married for financial reasons.
Mm-hmm.
They get married for lonely reasons.
Mm-hmm.
They get married because they're like, hey, I think I could step up in society.
Or kids are in the picture.
Mm-hmm. There's so many reasons, and that's when marriage can become a contract
Mm-hmm.
more
Right.
than a covenant.
Yeah, so I guess that's why you said covenant is a deep promise because a contract can be a level of promise.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about ghostwriting clients I've had,
Mm-hmm.
and I always have a contract with them, and I'm promising them that I will provide them with content, and they're promising me that they will provide me with
Mm-hmm.
obviously information, but also funds.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying covenant goes even deeper than contract. And also, contracts, if I think about the example I just gave, the reality is those have an end and a start date.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not in contract with my clients for just indefinite amounts of time. Whereas a covenant oftentimes is for an amount of time that you can't even count, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, marriage,
Right.
it's till death do us part,
Right.
unless there's a grounds for divorce,
Mm-hmm.
biblical grounds for divorce. And if you don't have that, it's supposed to be till death us do part.
Right.
But what we're saying is that a lot of couples will just end the marriage even if there's really no grounds for divorce.
Right. So what makes sometimes marriage feel like a contract is how people handle it.
Yeah.
Okay? How people go in and out of it
Mm-hmm.
makes it feel like a contract more than a covenant. And so there's similarities between a covenant and a contract, and there's differences. And I think one of the things that you're pointing out is that a contract has certain stipulations. It may have a beginning date and an end date.
Mm-hmm.
It may have a way to terminate the agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not saying that a marriage can't be terminated.
Right.
We're saying that if you go into it like a contract,
Yeah.
then you're more likely to terminate it. You're more likely to see it as something that has to fall within certain terms and conditions.
Mm.
And if it falls outside of those terms and conditions, then all of a sudden it can be dissolved.
Yeah.
And we're saying marriage is a little bit more mysterious than that.
Yeah.
That you can't, before you get married, list all of the terms and conditions
Yeah.
and say, we're going to encounter this, we're not going to encounter that, we're going to encounter this, and we definitely won't go through that.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, we'll wrap a contract around it and we're good. That's not how marriage works. You
Mm-mm.
really have to wrap a covenant around it to say, man, we can't see everything that's going to happen,
Right.
but that's when a covenant is stronger than a
Yeah,
contract.
and that makes sense. And the thing about marriage is that marriage reminds me, and I love this quote sometimes from Mike Tyson. Because you were saying that everybody, well, not everybody, some people feel as if, oh, my marriage isn't going to go through that. My marriage isn't going to go through that or that. And then I say to you, in the words of Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
Because life will punch you in the mouth sometimes.
Yeah.
And the thing about life is that the Bible tells us that rain falls on the just and the unjust.
Mm-hmm.
So you being just and you living a holy life and you being a Christian that is pleasing to God does not mean that life will not punch you in the mouth.
It'll punch you in the mouth. And when you think that your marriage is a contract, not a covenant,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to say, hey, I didn't account for this.
Yeah.
So that means we need to end the agreement. Or I did account for this, and here's where I take the exit ramp.
Right.
And we're not even saying marriage doesn't have any exits. We're
Yeah,
saying that if it's a Christian marriage, the Bible gives you exits.
correct.
And
And your spouse losing their job and you now having to downsize is not one of those biblical grounds for divorce. Guys, I don't know why he's always turning to the side. One of y'all commented on that last week. Like, Mark cracks me up because he's always looking to the side. I don't know what is over there. It's just our living room. So I don't know what he's looking at.
I'm just looking for help because
But there's no
sometimes
help because it's just our
I
living
need
room.
help because sometimes the comments and the way you say things is hilarious to me. It's true, but it's so hilarious
But
because it's really like hitting people exactly where they are. I laugh at that, but there's people out there that will dissolve their marriage because of that.
yes, there are people that are that, and I'm going to use the word shallow, that will say, when I married you, you were making six figures.
Right.
Now we got to a certain point in the marriage where you've lost your job altogether, and based on what I'm bringing in coupled with you not bringing in your six-figure income, we now have to downsize, and I'm not out here downsizing. And then I always wonder, where's the logic in that? Because if you divorce your spouse, you still don't have a six-figure income.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's just a trick of the enemy and
Yeah.
even society to be
Yes.
like, oh, this person is going downhill. You could do bad by yourself. It's that kind of mentality.
It's a trick because it makes marriage a lot more frivolous.
Yeah.
It makes it less meaningful. It makes it easier to dissolve and something that you're less willing to fight for
Mm.
when it's a piece of paper. Like there's people out there that consider marriage to be just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And that's why we say, hey, it's not a contract.
Right. A contract is a piece of paper.
A piece of paper. People are like, hey, I'm not going to get married because marriage is just a piece of paper. Or people are like, hey, I'm going to let go of my marriage because it's a piece of paper. People view marriage as a piece of paper no matter what side of the fence they're on.
Yeah.
They think that it's just a formality.
Right.
It is a covenant, it's a promise.
Yeah.
When you really look at it biblically, Um, the woman,
Mm-hmm.
God intended for the woman to be a virgin, and he intended for the man to be a virgin too.
Mm-hmm.
And when they consummate the marriage, that intimacy
Mm-hmm.
would break the woman's hymen
Right.
and blood would be released.
Mm-hmm.
And so when God sees marriage and the consummation of marriage,
Yeah.
the blood is a sign, a symbol of the covenant, because a
Yes.
blood covenant in the Bible is one of the strongest
But
covenants.
even in the kingdom of darkness, blood is used to make a covenant.
Yes.
And we're not going to go that deep into
No, but
that
it's powerful.
in this discussion, but some Christians don't even know, Mark, that even in the kingdom of darkness, blood is used as a contract. And that's why people who come from parts of the world, or just a knowledge of not even certain parts of the world, even some people in America who've maybe been a part of the occult before getting saved and things
Mhm.
like that, that's why you'll hear them say in their prayers things like, I break every blood covenant that was ever
Mhm.
made in my bloodline. I've prayed prayers like that, and I'm not even coming out of the occult, but
Right.
I've prayed prayers like that because blood in the spirit realm, whether you're talking about the kingdom of light or the kingdom of darkness, blood period in the spirit realm is how you make a covenant.
It's how you make a covenant. And so we're not saying if you weren't a virgin when you got married, somehow your
Mm-hmm.
marriage is less weighty in the spirit, it's less of a covenant.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that, but that's what God envisioned.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why the church comes together with Christ when he's on the cross is because he shed his blood.
Thank you,
He
because he
shed
was
his
making
blood.
a
He was
covenant.
making a promise that when I die, I'm opening the doors of salvation
Mm-hmm.
to the whosoever will, and it's open through blood.
Correct.
And
But and
all
even with Old Testament
yeah,
scripture,
the Passover.
for atonement, for atoning of sins, they had to kill an animal. There
Yeah.
had to be a shedding of blood.
Yes. Yes. That's why sacrifices
Yeah.
were often made when people were coming into covenant with each other and coming into covenant with God.
Mm-hmm.
It's a symbol of the promise. And so, if you look at that from a symbolic standpoint, marriage is not something that is just relegated to a piece of paper
No.
that you can easily rip up. God is
Mm-hmm.
saying, hey, you broke that hymen, you release blood.
Mm-hmm.
This is a covenant you cannot just walk out on
Yep.
unless you fall into these exceptions. Because as God sees it, he's like, you're still in covenant with that person.
Yes. Because
You're,
it's not just a piece of paper. Ripping
yeah,
up your marriage certificate doesn't just automatically make you. Guys,
that's so good. Say that again. I need you to say that again.
okay.
That is
Since
so
marriage is
good.
not just a piece of paper, just because you rip up your marriage license doesn't mean you're just automatically out of covenant. And listen, some people, Mark, that follow us are hard headed.
Mm,
And I know that you didn't probably expect me to say, some of y'all are hard headed, because I don't know how many times we have to reiterate that we do not advocate that people should stay in abusive situations.
right.
And yet, y'all continue to comment on these clips when we do these talks. Well, y'all shouldn't make those blatant statements because now you're encouraging women and men to stay in abusive situations. And I'm like, clearly, you're either not listening to the whole video, or y'all just hard headed.
Yeah,
Hard of
basically.
hearing. That's how it was
Basically.
called when I was growing up. Hard of hearing. Because
Basically.
I am reiterating that yes, sometimes the marriage covenant has to be ripped up physically, literally,
Mm-hmm.
because there are exceptions. God is not asking you to stay in an abusive situation.
Right.
But what we're saying is that generally speaking, if you have no biblical grounds for divorce, you ripping up your marriage license doesn't mean that God is like, oh, okay, yeah, you're done. He's
Yeah,
like, but you promised before me and a whole slew of other witnesses that you were going to work this out.
you promised. And, we're coming for the people who are viewing marriage as a simple contract
Correct.
and are letting go of it in a very
And are feeling like if I
carefree,
just get
careless
frustrated
way.
enough, I can just
Yeah.
walk away.
That's who we're coming for today, because there's levels to this and we don't even have time to
Mm-hmm.
explain all the exceptions and all the different forms and fashions and ways that marriage comes into play and how to
Yeah.
work it out. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to help somebody
Yes.
who thinks of it as, man, we hit a rough patch.
Right.
So now we need to let this thing go. When you
Correct.
go into business with someone, you are under contract with them. It's a
Mm-hmm.
partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not doing right by you or not doing right by the business,
Yeah.
you can walk away.
Right.
Because you hit a rough patch, you can walk away. You can close the doors.
Yeah.
But you can't do that with marriage
Mm-mm.
as if it's just a business partnership.
Correct.
This goes so much deeper. There is a spiritual connection,
Mm-hmm.
there is a psychological connection, there is an emotional connection,
Yeah.
there's a physical connection.
Mm-hmm.
Like a wedding cake has multiple layers, a
Mm.
marriage has multiple
That's good.
layers.
Yeah.
And you can't just say, hey, because it's not working out today,
Right.
then I can let go of it tomorrow.
Correct.
And we're trying to bring a lot more covenant today into marriage, a lot more thinking and consideration
Mm-hmm.
to how important this step is.
Yes.
Like, this is not just to, show your girlfriends that, hey, I can get somebody, I can
Mm-hmm.
get a man. This is not for you to be out here on your sixth husband because you're like 1 through 5, then treat me right. So the magic number is 6. Like, it's not a contract, it's a covenant. How many people you gonna promise yourself to? I'm just like, what are we doing in these streets? What are we
Yeah.
doing
People.
in these streets?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and for the ones that say y'all are out here encouraging people to stay in certain situations, you probably already ripped up your contract. So that's why
Yeah,
you're getting offended because you're getting hit.
right.
You done already ripped up your piece of paper and now you're feeling convicted because this couple came on here and said to you, but maybe you didn't have grounds for ripping up your marriage license.
Yeah, yeah, you didn't have grounds. So, we feel like a covenant, a marriage covenant, is not a contract
Mm-mm.
because one of the biggest reasons is the termination of it.
Yeah.
And we feel like people terminate their marriage too easily.
Too easily in today's society.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's pushing this talk
Yeah.
because the amount of hardship you're going to have to endure. That's what you're signing up for. People often say, I didn't sign up for this. You did. You signed up for
Right. You
this.
just want to be like, I unsubscribe. I actually love unsubscribing from emails because sometimes I did sign up for it, but then I just actually decide that no.
Yeah.
So I do enjoy unsubscribing, but you can't unsubscribe from your marriage just because your spouse is getting on your nerves that day.
People opt out all the time. Like, I'm opting out of
Opting
where this
out,
thing is going.
unsubscribing, changing my address, all type of craziness.
Yeah, your husband comes home one day and the house is empty. Your
Mm,
stuff is gone. He
mm,
don't know where you are because you decided to unsubscribe from your marriage
mm.
and you did not have biblical grounds. That's what we're trying to say. This is not a contract, y'all. You have to understand that there's deep, deep, um, not consequences, but there's deep considerations
Mm-hmm.
that you need to have when you're stepping into this thing. And one of the best things about a marriage being a covenant and not a contract is when both parties understand that,
Mm-hmm.
man, you're able to get through some of the toughest seasons in life
Yep.
because you're in your head saying, I made a promise.
Mm-hmm.
And your
Yeah.
spouse is saying the same thing. And that is the three-stranded cord that is uneasily broken
Mm-hmm.
because you're wrapped so tightly in this promise. It's
Yeah.
hard to unravel that. It's hard to disrupt that.
Oh
And both
yeah.
people are like, yo, I promised. I promised. And if you're the type of person where your word means nothing, your
Mm-mm.
word is not your bond, good luck in having a good marriage.
Mm.
Because you won't feel like your word means something. You won't feel like your word is strong enough to bind the marriage
Mm.
because your words are so empty and your
Mm-hmm.
words are so careless. But when you feel like your words are binding, you'll stand in front of people and you'll make a promise, and then you'll remember that you made a promise verbally.
Yeah.
And so we didn't even get into like verbal contracts and
Mm-hmm.
the power of how you speak,
Mm-hmm.
verbal covenants,
Mm.
the power of what you say.
Yeah.
You say to your wife, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll ride for you.
Right.
That's a verbal covenant.
That's good. That's good.
And so you can't just can't just walk away from that.
Yeah.
In court, verbal contracts, what you say is admissible in court.
But that's why the enemy goes around accusing the brethren,
Yeah.
because in the court of heaven, he is trying to bring
Evident.
evidence
Yeah.
to try and convince God why you're not worth it,
Yeah.
why you're not worthy, why he shouldn't be gracious to you. That's what he did to Job, but he still does it because even the enemy knows the power of words. So in the court of heaven, he doesn't have physical documents that he's presenting. He has his word against you that he is presenting.
That's so good. That's so good because when you really think about it, when God made a promise to Abraham, it was verbal.
Exactly.
It was verbal.
Exactly. Y'all out here acting like Abraham signed a piece of papyrus. It was a verbal contract. So I'm just agreeing.
I know, but you bring in like papyrus into that. That's good. I like that. I like that because it brings it home. Like you can see it. You can see
Yes.
Abraham.
He didn't
Like
have a ream of paper.
that is funny. But listen, I think that that is a good conversation. Something that people can think about. Food for thought
Yep.
about how to remember that your marriage is a covenant,
Not
not
a
a contract.
contract. Yes.
So you got anything else?
I'm good.
Okay, I'm good too. So listen, this has been another episode of Breakfast with Mark and Jen. Don't
Mm-hmm.
forget to like and subscribe,
Yes.
and we will talk to you again soon. Take care.